Hi, welcome to Chat Communications Happenings and Trends. Today we have a very dense show for you today, so we'll try to get through again all the content that we have available, and then of course hopefully we'll be able to take your calls in the process. So first off, we're going to start with the Supreme Court nomination that Donald Trump has, I guess, offered to be confirmed. Brett Kavanaugh. And so, if you don't know who he is, currently he's serving as a judge in the DC District Court. He was formally confirmed to that position in 2006. And of course, this was a Senate confirmation as well. So, you can look at Senate, the currently serving senators that were actually there in the Senate in 2006 and determine how they probably will vote this time. And I suspect he'll get confirmed and probably quite easily, especially considering that he has already gone through this process once. One thing that I do want to note is that obviously he's very right wing. He's a right wing justice currently serving. And I think that one thing that people really, I don't think politics should really come into factor when it comes to upholding the law. The law is supposed to be blind, and so if you have a political leaning, obviously that has bias, and that is indicative of actually not being blind. And when they go to the Supreme Court, or those acting on the Supreme Court are supposed to interpret the Constitution. Unfortunately, I feel like as the Supreme Court does exist and probably will exist for many years to come, we essentially have a rogue court. And what I mean by that is that it's no longer just interpreting the Constitution and acting in the best interests of the general populace or the people at large. In fact, the majority of the rulings have been very corporatist in nature, and I do not suspect that this will be any different. Now, one thing that does continue to come up in a lot of these debates, or a lot of these, I guess, concerns that people pose, is this idea about being pro-life or and not pro-choice when it comes to, I guess, maybe rulings or maybe the potentiality of overturning Roe v. Wade. Well, I think that this is usually going to be done as a scare tactic for, I guess, to encourage Democrats to come out and vote, or I guess liberals to come out and vote in the next elections, because we have been through this dance before. In fact, Janet was telling me before the program started that in the 80s that this was also a concern when they were, I guess, nominating Supreme Courts or more conservative Supreme Court justices. And again, this whole debate popped up about, well, they're going to overturn Roe v. Wade. It has not happened. And I think there's precedent there that's saying that, hey, the Supreme Court has already ruled on this. And when they do start overturning former rulings of the Supreme Court, it does call into question every ruling they've ever made, because now it becomes a point of, well, now it can just be overturned. Is there a point to having the Supreme Court in the first place when the next cycle or the next justices that are allowed to be in the court are just going to overturn it? And I think a lot of court justices recognize that it becomes a slippery slope problem. In fact, I have a quote for you by Brett Kavanaugh when he was actually confirmed the first time, if I can find it. Let's see. So he was being asked by Chuck Schumer how he felt about Roe v. Wade, and Brett Kavanaugh's response when he was getting appointed to, or I guess confirmed to, the DC District Court was, the Supreme Court has already ruled on this, and I will not be overturning Roe v. Wade or citing in any way that would infringe upon the Roe v. Wade decision, because again, the Supreme Court has already decided on this. I could not find the quote, but that's exactly what he said. So from his mouth, you can kind of see exactly where he is. In fact, when what's his name, Garland, was getting confirmed, he pretty much echoed the same sentiment. But here's the thing. Again, as I mentioned, he's been appointed to the DC District Court by many of the same senators that currently exist or are currently serving another term in the Senate. And are we able to pull up the graphic from Jedi of Gallifrey? by any chance, where I can actually talk? Anyways, I have a tweet here. I thought it was pretty poignant tweet in which he says, prediction, Democrats will act mad about Brett Kavanaugh for about a week, and then 5 or 6 will vote to confirm him, at which point the hashtag resistance will blame Susan Sarandon. And I think that pretty much sums up everything that's going to happen regarding this particular vote. He will get confirmed very easily. Where the problem lies, again, is his pro-corporatist stance. He is no friend to working people. And in that regard, neither was Justice Kennedy. And so we're just replacing it. The way that I view this currently, especially with him having been confirmed to a district court and obviously him making absolutely no moves on Roe v. Wade, is that he just is another Kennedy. And so you'll still see the same decisions that Kennedy has made over the course of the Trump administration, or that we have at least seen. All the decisions have been very pro-corporate. They have basically been against the workers, as we saw in recent Supreme Court rulings about pensions no longer being required in the public sector, which of course will be used to basically destroy unions in the public sector. So it's unfortunate, but that's where we are. In fact, I think that even Barack Obama's proposed appointment, which I don't remember his name right now, and I'm sorry, but he was also very pro-corporate. And so I would imagine that not much would change. So basically, maybe on social issues, he would be a little bit better, but he would still be prone to side with the corporate America. And so we'd still see the attack on the American worker that we do currently see today. And that's an unfortunate reality of the two-party system that are currently in power, right? Is that they're both pro-corporatist. In fact, it's just super right and then right. Again, we have no leftists we have no leftist party or no mainstream party that is representing the left-wing part, or I guess the left-leaning part of the country. And like I said, and I've mentioned many a times, the country actually does lean left. And so any pro-corporate decision that is made by the Supreme Court, that will be made by the Supreme Court, is probably something that the majority of people, as the country does lean left, will not approve of. What are your thoughts, guys? Janet, I'm gonna start with you. What's your thoughts on this? Sorry.
I know. I was being hesitant on talking about the SCOTUS because I was sick of it. But anyways, I feel like when you talked about the Roe v. Wade, like, this is something that I've said before, and it has been brought up, and it was brought up in the 90s too, through when Clinton was in too. They brought it up because when Clinton was, they were talking about, if Gore didn't win and stuff like that, like there was someone up for the SCOTUS then. So, 2 times in my life, there was like this fear mongering about Roe v. Wade. And I just, after the second time, I was like, yeah, I don't see them taking this. And like you were saying earlier today to me was they really have to have a case to come up anyways. So, I don't know if one of the states would bring up a case or something like that, but they have to, they bring up the case and they have to pick that case to talk about it. And I could see them not really wanting to, because a majority of the people are okay with this. You know what I mean? It's just a very small fringe of people that don't really want it. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe not small. It's, like 30% or something. But I mean, still, it's our SCOTUS has always been pretty conservative anyways. We haven't ever really had a liberal or left-leaning SCOTUS at any point. So I felt like back in 2016, 15, when they started talking about Garland and stuff like that, and I was 16 after Scalise died, but I, I felt it back then too. Like, they should have just let Garland in, but whatever. But they, I wasn't scared, but they kept saying that then. Like, well, what if Trump gets in now, and now we're gonna have a SCOTUS that's conservative. I'm like, basically, oh, is that a SCOTUS that was conservative? So I don't, for me, it didn't really matter.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But I would actually go a step further and say that we haven't really had a left wing representative party either. At least a true left leaning or left wing, like real progressive party. And so I think that the SCOTUS is really just representing the members of Congress more so than they have been or are representing the people. That would be my argument. But I think that's all we have to say about the Supreme Court. Let's see if there's any comments. I'm sorry, I'm trying to do multiple things at once. I am not on the normal computer that I use, so bear with me for a little bit. And Janet, if you happen to see a comment, let me know. Oh, and Janet did mention the number to call in. It is 508-534-8585. And so Mark Anderson mentions that he's scared. He says, I am scared of Roe versus Wade being taken away. And so Mark, what I was just explaining and what Janet was just saying is that this kind of comment or this kind of, I guess, narrative about Supreme Court justices has typically always been in case whenever a Supreme Court justice has been available to nominate and the right wing is in charge or they're projected to be in charge or something like that. And I'm leaning towards it being more of a scare tactic now than anything. Could it be overturned? Certainly it could be, but again, it would set a very bad precedence for previous rulings that the Supreme Court has made. And if they overturn Roe versus Wade, I think that it's time to start attacking things like Citizens United, and they should start overturning other decisions that the Supreme Court has made, or we should demand that they do so, because again, they would set a precedent for overturning previous Supreme Court decisions, and that would not be a very good precedent to set, because once they get replaced, in 50 years from now, however long, the new SCOTUS could come in and overturn any decisions that they've made, and they probably would not want that to happen. And it would also bring into question the value of the Supreme Court if they start overturning previous decisions. So I think it would be a poor precedent to take. But good point. Or you can be concerned. It's fine. Brad Bloom, this is just made me laugh. So I'm going to read this and then I'm going to move on to the next story. So Brad Bloom says these ancient marshmallows are more passionate about keeping their mistresses than actually repealing Roe versus Wade. Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, you have mistresses, things happen, and birth control is not 100% effective. But then you kind of maybe paying your mistress off to go get an abortion because you don't want your wife to find out that you accidentally got somebody pregnant. Yeah, I just find that it's kind of hypocritical for conservatives to use that service, especially when they are in extramarital relationships or having an extramarital affair, and they use that service like it's nothing, and then don't want anyone else to have access to the same service. It's despicable. Okay, moving on. So Donald Trump today pardoned two people, and those two people were actually the impetus or kind of the motivation behind the kind of armed insurrection you saw. I guess this was years ago. This was under the Obama administration of a federal building. It was in Oregon. Was it in Oregon that this happened? Where they took over a federal office building and they were armed. Anyways, The impetus for
Sorry.
that was that a cattle rancher wanted to basically use federal land without paying dues for the federal land for his cattle. And the cattle was eating off this federal property. And usually, when cattle ranchers utilize federal lands, they have to pay just a small fee in order to do so. And this particular cattle rancher refused to do so, and so he got fined. And when he would not pay the fine, he was told to get the cattle off of the federal land. He refused to do so. Anyways, two arsonists came out of the woodworks, and one of them was a cattle rancher too. But two arsonists came and burned down federal land or federal property, if you want to say it as that. They ended up getting 5 years in prison for doing that. Anyways, Donald Trump today pardoned those two individuals that were responsible for destructive of federal property. And Janet was saying that she thinks that Donald Trump is getting off on all of these pardons, and he may very well be doing that. But all of the pardons that he has done so far have been people that are obviously very right wing, but have very poor records, to say the least. You have the sheriff of Apiro pardon, who was responsible for Tent City in Arizona. And if you don't remember what that was, he was basically abusing the prison population. That's the best way I can put it. He's a horrible human being. I think in one instance, a woman died giving birth in one of his prisons because he would not get her medical care. He refused to do so, even though she was clearly giving birth. In fact, I think either she or her baby or both died during that time. And so he's responsible for atrocities of and human neglect, and just because, and she wasn't even convicted of anything, by the way. This was just jail. I mean, she was just waiting trial. So she basically paid the ultimate price with her life for a minor infraction. That's terrible. Anyways, Sheriff Apiro's pardoned. Again, atrocities against humankind that he's done for even like not the criminal population. These are just normal, regular folks. And then you have these two pardons of these arsonists too. And he may again be getting getting off on these things, but I think that there's an agenda, or there's potentially a message that he's saying. Basically, oh, right wing, you can just do whatever the fuck you want and I'll help pardon you, especially if you get any notoriety or media attention out of it. And I mean, that's clear from his behavior and from his actions. It's beyond, I have no words for this, to say the least, because again, this is a party, and he's supposed to represent a party that always runs on family values, the rule of law specifically. Yet he does these pardons of people that have already been convicted of a crime. In Sheriff Apiro's case, he admitted to the crime. In that Dinesh D'Souza's case, he admitted to the crime, and they get pardons. And so I'm thinking, where is the rule of law when it comes to these people that were serving a term that, and in Dinesh D'Souza's case, had already served his term? He was out of prison, and they get pardoned. And by the way, I love the fact that Alice Marie Johnson is out of jail. And if you don't remember, she was serving a lifetime sentence for her first drug offense. However, that was a commutation. And so how that differs from a pardon is that she gets credit for time served, and it's as if you're kind of reducing the number of years that someone has to serve out their sentence. So it's still on their record. It's still they still probably have to go through probation and still have to be monitored via the judicial system in some way after they are released. So it's not a pardon, it's commutation. A pardon, on the other hand, is complete forgiveness of a crime as if it didn't happen. So it gets removed from the record, from your criminal record. Although it should never get removed from anybody's conscience, right? But yeah, it's different. So you have this instance of something that actual Donald Trump did do, and did do okay, did well. I wish he would just pardon every drug offender. every nonviolent drug offender from prison, because I think that our war on drugs is draconian, and it has obviously hurt a lot of communities, specifically communities of color, especially when you have discrepant punishment provided to specific individuals or specific groups of people in the first place. That again is not a blind judicial system. And it certainly does not indicate the rule of law when you pardon people that have done violent crimes, such as Sheriff O'Piro or these two arsonists. And this should piss anybody off. And I'm just wondering, okay, where are all these Republicans that are for the rule of law? Isn't arson indicative of violence? Like, it is. It's a violent crime. It's a violent destruction of someone's personal property, even if you don't own that personal property. So you just can't set it ablaze. Janet, what are your thoughts?
All right. So first I want to go, all right. So talking about the Hammonds, the thing with them, so it was 2 counts of arson. That they claim the, what, you know, the second one was they were doing what the federal government would have done anyways, because they were trying to stop forest fires with it. I don't know the particulars of that. And the other one, the one in 2001, was because they were trying to scare off predatory animals. So I don't know, like, so there was, and so they admitted to this. They first were not even given the minimum for arson, and this is 2 counts, and they weren't even given the minimum for 1 count of arson. And so the prosecution went back and got the 5 years, which is the minimum. And then, like, they were 4 years and 3 years into their sentence. That there has to be some reason why, you know, like you said, like there's some, you know, nefarious reason. And then if you look at everything, and this goes into my second point, is that you start looking at who he's pardoning, and the sheer fact that the one, you know, the one that we are happy with, you know, the Black woman who was pardoned for non-violent drug charges, after, what was she in, over 20 years, 25 right?
Years, yeah.
25 years. She doesn't get a pardon. So, okay. You know, I'm so sick of hearing people out there defend Trump and say he's not racist, or, you know, even if the people, you know, the people behind him may be telling him to do this, but he has, you know, he knows damn well who he's pardoning and who he's, you know, why he's doing what he's doing. And I think when I said that I think that he's getting off on this stuff is because he did get, I know, like, in the other pardons, you know, it was just his group, but he did, after Alice Johnson, he did get, you know, some of the left and the more progressives being like, well, okay, that was a good thing. Right. You know what I mean? So then he feels like, see, you know, and that's all he hears. He sits in his little bubble and he just wants to hear the good stuff. So that's probably what he's thinking. He's probably, I don't know if he's thinking between conservatives or, you know, people of color, or the reasons why they're in there. I think he's just, people are telling him to pardon this person and he's just doing it. I don't even think he has any opinion on these people.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably right. He's getting kind of a list from his advisors, and he's just going like, yeah, I'll just do whatever. I'm just wondering the motivations behind those advisors. Like, you know, why not pardon somebody like Alice Marie Johnson, who for her first offense, nonviolent offense, was in prison for life, and she's not an exception by any means. This happens all over the country. These cases are the case, but she only gets a commutation of her sentence. And I think we're all just done with at least from a resource tax dollar point of view. If you want to look at it like that, you want to waste our tax dollars on imprisoning nonviolent drug offenders. Why? It just doesn't, it's not fiscally responsible in that regard. I don't think it is. I think that it's a waste of resources if that's the view that you want to take. I think it's also a humanitarian thing. We have the highest prison population per capita in the world. We are number one in imprisoning our own citizens, and we have got to at least take an introspective look and understand that we're doing so because prisons are privatized. There's a lot of private prisons. It's a big industry, and they get profits from this. And the more people that they can imprison, the better. What better way to do it but using something like the drug war? Because let's just be honest, a lot of people utilize drugs. They just do. And it's almost like how the prohibition, you see a lot of people getting locked up for drinking alcohol because a lot of people also drink. So you have a lot of users that are in prison and serving life terms for marijuana, for something as minor as that actually is less damaging to your system than alcohol, that doesn't even, there's not really any cases that have been reported of people being in violent outrages due to marijuana, whereas alcohol, on the other hand, holy crap, there's a lot of instances of that occurring, yet that's legal, and something like marijuana as a drug is not. It just makes no sense, but it does if you look from it from a profitized model. It's good business, it's big business, and they want to retain that. And I think any way that they will lock up their own citizens or our own citizens helps the private prison industry and there's a lot of senators and representatives and governmental officials, higher government officials that actually have stocks in that industry. It's a mess because we don't want our politicians to be influenced by these things. If you're going to have a privatized prison, I'm not really down for that, but if you are, you should not be invested in that privatized prison and also be the one deciding policy regarding any type of prison system, as far as I'm concerned. But that's of course not what happens. People think that like people can make decisions without, being invested in it themselves. It's dumb because a lot of conservatives argue, well, people are inherently selfish. Okay, so why is it that you can believe that your senator who is invested in the private prison industry, if, like you said, people are inherently selfish, what makes you think that they cannot do something within their own self-interest as opposed to within the interest of humans or the constituents that they are supposed to be representing? It makes no sense. And maybe someone could explain that one to me, because that's completely bonkers in my mind. Let's see. Aaron A. says that just looked at race differences with drug use. Blacks use at almost the same rates as whites, but are almost 5 times more likely to be arrested for it. So I think we did I know we did a report a few weeks ago about people that are currently sitting in jail awaiting trial. And it was in like the hundreds of thousands of people just waiting for trial because they can't afford to bond themselves out or bail themselves out. They can't afford those. They can't, or maybe they didn't get to even see a judge yet to see if they can get a bail. So we have a problem, and of course that's arrested, right? And so when you think about arrested, well, those numbers where they're going to be waiting trial to see if even if they are guilty in the first place, and there is in the United States where there's supposed to be a presumption of innocence, that's not there if people are imprisoned or in jail awaiting trial. That presumption of innocence is gone. I'm just throwing it out there. And if you want somebody like Michael Cohen to not be under house arrest or to not be under Michael, am I thinking of the right person? No. What's this? Paul Manafort. If you want somebody like that to not be in prison, then you should also want or advocate for someone like a nonviolent drug offender to not be awaiting their trial while doing so rotting in jail. It makes no sense. And it makes no sense to pardon people that have already admitted their crime and are arguably violent crimes. Arson is considered a violent crime. In fact, people argue that if people are that there's a pattern of history with people that murder people and people that have done serial murders or serial killers, that they're arsonists, and you have 2 counts of arson against both of these individuals. Well, I wonder what other violent behavior will they display, or are they capable of? Obviously, there was an armed insurrection from their cohort of individuals or from their group of friends that resulted in a shootout with the police and with this armed insurrection, which, by the way, was all over property they didn't own in the first place. Where were all the Blue Lives Matter folks during that time? Just gonna throw it out there. Where were you guys that were like, yeah, armed insurrection against the federal government? Okay, those are cops getting shot at. You do realize that, right? Do their lives not matter if it's somebody that you happen to support or like for some reason, for them stealing property that they didn't own in the first place? How would you like it if I came across and I was like, hey, get the F out, right? Of your establishment. It's mine now, and I'm going to bring my armed buddies with me. I don't think you'd be pleased by that. I would have a hard time believing that you would be okay with that. And you probably wouldn't be okay with people cheering me on to do that either. I would just argue that. It just makes no sense. It makes perfect sense. So here's the thing, and I'll ask the room this as well, and maybe you can call in as well. Do you think that there's a deeper meaning behind these pardons? I think Janet mentioned like a pattern of behavior as far as these pardons are concerned. Do you think that it's something deeper? And by deeper, I've heard people proposing that, well, maybe maybe Donald Trump or his advisors, right, are giving kind of a signal to his supporters that armed insurrections are a completely appropriate way to handle whatever problems they have with the federal government. Do you think it's something deeper than that, like along those lines, like nefarious deeper? Or do you think it's simply, well, they would have voted for me, so I'm going to pardon them? Like, I really don't understand the justification myself, or even if there is one, I don't understand why you would pardon arsonists. I have no idea. Again, that number, if you want to actually answer this, it's 508-534-8585. And you can also just call in and just discuss any of the other stories that we've mentioned as well. Let's see. Andrew, I think you're right. Andrew mentions that hypocrisy is their brand, though they know they're hypocrites, they don't care. You know, I was having this discussion a year ago with somebody about hypocrisy, and that it really doesn't work as an argument against anybody. Even if you're on the left, it's not going to work for the left, it's not going to work for the right, the center, the socialists, the right-wing conservatives. It's not going to work, because honestly, it's pretty hard to stay consistent anyways, because we're human beings. We evolve in our decisions or in our thought processes, or we devolve, right? So so hypocrisy is such an easy thing to mention, but again, it's not really a good argument because it won't work on anybody. I'm sure like if you look at all of our videos here, there's going to be a point where I have said one thing and then said another, because it's really hard to stay consistent. It just is. That we're flawed. I tried to stay as consistent as possible, but I guarantee you there's going to be something you're going to find in which I did not stay consistent, and call me out on it, of course. And then I'll just say, well, I evolved or something like that. Who knows what my justification will be. So what would be a better argument than pointing out hypocrisy? What, Janet, do you have an idea, kind of, or even Lauren, maybe?
Actually, I have a phone call. I have Andrew on the line, so maybe he can answer.
All right, Andrew, go for it.
Hey, it's look, at the end of the day, like everything we're talking about today is kind of different manifestations of the same problem, right? Bill Clinton abused the presidential pardon as well to make money, right? Everyone's kind of forgotten about that, but he basically got paid to pardon people. I believe Colombian drug lord or something was on the list. The mafia people. People had money, paid him money, and got pardons. Right? The entire presidential pardon itself is kind of problematic. Right? It seems like it's more of a holdover from feudalist policy. The entire criminal justice system from the ground up is flawed. Right? The Supreme Court doesn't need better justices. It needs a complete reform. Now, there's a part of me that thinks Trump winning, yes, I'm an Aussie. Good call on the accent. If Trump wins, getting his Supreme Court, it's one of those cases where he might lose when he wins because they've been playing this game about getting our justices in, our team winning, when nobody's been saying, hey, the whole game's wrong. Right? Now, you're looking at Bernie Sanders running in 2020. He's looking at running with a leading-edge plank of Medicare for All, which is massively popular. He's following it up with a bunch of New Deal policies that will make him the most popular living American ever. And looking at the way things are going in New York, it looks like the machine is not going to be able to stop him. And it's not, once that gate breaks, right, you're going to see 2 to 3 generations of left-wing policy in your government, right? The Supreme Court is supposed to be a check and balance, just like the presidential pardon is supposed to be a check and balance. Your check and balances have failed, right? So Trump showing how badly they've failed is just generating the will and the mandate to add it to the list of things that need reform. Now, if they had completely control the Supreme Court on its own, that's not going to stop a Sanders White House, right? Because if he controls all 3 legislatures, which he stands a real chance of doing, running on Medicare for All, he stands a real chance of having progressive control of Congress, Senate, and the White House. If the Supreme Court throws out one of his laws, he can go to Parliament or Congress, rewrite the law, and have it put in power again before the ink's dried on the Supreme Court hearing. Right? It only works when you cripple the legislative process. And the system has got so bad that when progressives take over, the Supreme Court is not really on its own going to be able to protect the corporate interest. It's part of why they're pushing Trump to go so far to the right now, is because they know their time in the sun is coming to an end, right? If they're doing real research, I fully expect groups like ALEC and the Koch brothers are doing real research, real surveys, doing real demographics and real science, and not doing the paid-for type that we're being fed through the media. And they know they're in trouble, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's why they're burning political capital to pass things like that tax reform bill. It's the Supreme Court on its own is not the big deal they're making it out. Just like the abortion issue is used. It's a real issue. It's a real issue that affects real people, but it's being used in politics to make people emotional and get them engaged so they can be manipulated. Neither the Democrats or the Republicans want to put these issues permanently to bed because their machines turn them into profit for both political and financial gain.
Absolutely.
So they have no interest in permanently fixing them. That's not how they work. That's why those machines need to die.
Right.
Right? And it's not just abortion, it's not just criminal justice, it's not just everything else. You need systemic reform. And people focusing on the Supreme Court, I'm like, look, Bernie could get in, and with the support he'll have, he could say, we're actually going to go to a 32-seat Supreme Court, and I'm going to appoint all the new members, and there's nothing anyone will be able to do to stop him.
Right.
Even the Supreme Court. Right? So it's one of those things where people need to draw it back a little, take the focus back a bit, look at the system we're dealing with here and how you go about fixing it. And the presidential pardon problem has the same solution that money in politics has, that the Supreme Court has. We need systemic reform to remove corruption and inject more transparency into every level and process in government. It's the same solution to 99% of our problems.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Anyway,
I think that we need some serious reformations, and because again, you did mention that the presidential pardon is kind of a throwback to feudalistic era, and you're right, because I had read something pretty recently, I think maybe a few months ago, about that actually being available in the first place, and why it was a compromise to get other things when they were forming the Declaration of Independence and things like that. It was a compromise because they didn't want the president. Some people didn't want the president to have that ability, and some did. And so they utilized it as a compromise tactic because, again, some people did envision that this was a kind of a monarchy type of thing, a throwback to the system that we want to get away from, or that we're trying to get away from. So I think it's interesting.
It's like we're a lot of these systems are check and balances, which were then subverted to create corruption, right? So the idea that you guys elect so many officials in the US. You elect everything from dog catcher to your president. Like any given person in the US probably falls into the remit of voting for like 30 or 40 different people. Right, you hit a point where there's only so much saturation you can expect an informed average voter to actually have about every single one of those elections. As a check and balance, it's not very good, right? It lends itself to a moneyed interest paying some lawyers to corrupt that whole system. I mean, the whole system needs review. How you pass laws needs review. Why do you really need Congress and Senate to write 2 bills every time you want to pass a law? Why does the law need to be written 27 volumes deep before you vote, right? That's not how you make it. When I'm at work and I have a problem and I go with guys to work out my problem, you usually start with something like, I've got to move this giant heavy thing from there to there, right? That's what you take the vote on. Are we going to move it? Yes, okay, that's what you take the vote on. So what should be voted on in the legislature is basically a mission statement, right? You should say, we want money out of politics and corruption, whatever. Let's do a brief statement saying the goal that we want to achieve. Let's do a vote on that, and then you pass it to the department that's got to implement it, and we say, we want you to flesh this out into regulations. We'll review in 6 months, and then in 6 months, and then in 6 months. Then if everything's working well, you know what? We'll push the review out to 5 years. The reviews never stop, right? The transparency should never stop. But there have been people who have a vested interest in making the government system fail, right? They want cracks in the system because that opens opportunities for rich, greedy assholes to exploit the system, right? So they pay for it and they consistently push for that. No, we want a simpler system, right? You've got Jeremy Corbyn talking about abolishing the House of Lords in the UK, right? This is the type of conversations we should be having. The other thing people on the left need to think about, especially in the US, right? We've been playing defensive for decades. We've been playing defense for 40 years. We've been watching a game where they always play minority politics, whether it's GOP or Democrats, intentionally, right? It was an engineered game. Well, you're facing in the next 2 to 4 years having a overwhelmingly progressive government. right? This hasn't happened in living memory. People need to think about what they're going to do with it, right? Because not only are you going to win and start cleaning up the mess that the last 40 years of neoliberalism is going to make, you're going to be in a position to rewrite your constitution, right? FDR had a second Bill of Rights he wanted to pass. You're genuinely within 6 years, 8 years of progressives being able to rewrite the second Bill of Rights and enshrine it in your constitution. You don't need minority politics anymore. The left and the positions the left stand for are 60 to 70% popular with the American people. You don't need the GOP. You don't need the shit libs. You don't need any of them, right? The progressive planks on their own, especially when they start to become successful, are going to make the government that enacts them so incredibly popular that it is the perfect time for people to start thinking about rewriting your constitution so that it actually works for the working class, right? It looks bad because of the position we're in, but the trajectory we're on now, the entire world is swinging left. Right? This is the time where we need to start thinking about what we're going to do when we hit that bottom and bounce. Anyway, sorry.
No, Andrew, I could listen to you forever. I think you have some really good points, but there are some things that I do kind of disagree with. For one, the progressive takeover. I think that is a really great perspective to have. I don't think it's going to happen, partly because I think that the Democratic machine is very strong. I mean, so you may get a progressive president like Bernie Sanders or some other pretty left president, or more left than we've seen again in living memory. But I don't think that will be representative of the federal governments or even local governments. So especially local governments, especially not necessarily city governments, but kind of state governments, because when you start trying to rewrite the Constitution, that's an amendment that you have to make, and you have to have 3/4 of the states to pass any amendment. And I would be very hesitant in seeing that actually happen, even if we have a progressive president. And so that's why it's been so hard to actually include amendments as of late, just because of the fact that it is very difficult to get that many states on board and then get people to want to do it in the first place. Because I do think you need a constitutional amendment to get money out of politics, for one. The second thing about so I think kind of your statement about the checks and balances have failed. I agree with you, especially when we have such a like super majorities in state governments and federal governments and things like that. But I still believe that they should be there because they work when they don't fail. And so that would mean to actually strengthen them instead of like completely abolish them. So something like you mentioned, adding more Supreme Court justices instead of abolishing the entire thing. Or one way in which, so I was having a conversation with this months ago as well with somebody, but look at somebody like Bernie Sanders. He's a current senator from Vermont. Well, there's not a lot of people in Vermont. But you look at somebody like Kamala Harris, who's a Californian senator. Well, California only is allocated a certain number of senators. Bernie Sanders in his one position is much more powerful, like people-wise, because he has less people that he's actually representing than somebody like Kamala Harris, who has a lot of people to represent. That's actually the case with the House of Representatives too. So we've got a representative from Tennessee who, and you get a handful of them, but the number of people that they represent is far less than the number of people that somebody from California as a representative represents. And so I think you would need to actually consider adding more people so that you can actually have a balance there. You get allocated the number of people you represented, and it's proportional. So that would be a way to potentially strengthen that. That way, you actually have more of a balance than like these, you know, things that come up, as you mentioned, why you need two chambers to have a bill passed or to even promote a bill, especially when you have it controlled by just one party. And that's a good point. But again, if you add more people and they're left leaning, because the country does lean left, so it would make sense that actually the representatives would lean left too. And then you would have more of a fight when it comes to these bills that are being proposed. And so I think that would be a far superior idea than to just get rid of the system. But yeah, I think our judicial system does need complete overhaul. I honestly don't have a solution to that, to be perfectly honest. I know that getting people out of prison for minor drug offenses would be a good place to start. Community-based policing might be the front end of that. But as far as like kind of the higher end of that, I don't know. I don't have a solution. I just don't know. So Andrew, thank you for your comments, by the way. Let's see. We do have another story that we'd like to get to. Janet, do you think we have enough time to get to it?
It's 2 of. I don't know if you want to just hold it off till Thursday, because it is an important story. So I'm not sure. I mean, I don't care.
Democratic vote, guys. Should we continue our next story, or just call it today?
Brad says I love stories.
Why is that not coming up on mine?
I don't know.
All right.
I'm faster than you.
I guess so. Okay, political appointees to the judiciary is a mistake. Andrew, I think you're right. And I think judges could be drawn from the public or could be voted on, but we have to get moneyed interests out of the process, because as soon as that gets involved, it's corrupted. And so you can bet that judge will side alongside of corporations. So you might have a judge that has their campaign was potentially or essentially paid for by the private prison industry, and then you know that judge has now an incentive to get more people behind bars, because it's tit for tat. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours type of thing that they got going on. So as soon as you get moneyed interest out of the system, I am all for voting for judges and public defenders and things like that. But we have to get money out of politics before we do that completely.
I agree.
Okay. All right.
So do we go on the next story, or I don't care either?
Is Lauren there? Because I would like to get a vote.
I don't.
You don't care? Okay. No, because I'd like to actually talk about it and like have a better conversation and maybe have more people calling in on it.
Yeah, I don't want to feel rushed. Yeah, I don't want to feel rushed on it. It's about school to prison pipeline. It's about pre-delinquency, and so it's a very important
first place.
Yes, yes. And so it's a very important story we want to do. So we want to give it time, like give it enough time.
Give it the full time that it deserves.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on in it, and I want to be able to explain it very thoroughly, and then have a very thorough discussion about it as well, because it's actually a really important story. So we will get to that on Thursday. So guess what? You get a little to be continued thing, and I know everybody hates that. Everybody hates that, but it does bring people back, right?
Yes.
See how we
now you all have to come back Thursday now.
Yep.
If you have any plans, you got to cancel them now, because you're going to be there. Every single person. I'm taking your names, and I'll hunt you down.
All righty. So thank you guys for joining us today. I really did enjoy seeing your comments. Andrew, thank you for calling in. Again, call in all that you want. I just love hearing your perspective and what you have to say as well. Yeah, so yeah, somebody said cliffhangers. There you go. And we will be back on Thursday. Oh, by the way, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. It's really super easy. You get your mouse or whatever your device, and then you go and select the subscribe button that's underneath the video. So select that. And also, if you want to receive notifications from us for when we do a live video or have a new video for you guys to watch, hit that bell. You should get notifications for when a new video becomes available to you. And lastly, consider donating just a little bit to our Patreon page. It's kind of how we kind of stay operational. Again, we do put a lot of thought into the content that we do provide to you, as well as the fact that there's a lot of research that goes behind this. So there's a lot of time throughout our days in which we have to actually go and read this stuff. But we do it because we love it and we love you guys. But do donate to our page because we need your help and we want you all to be a part of this process. And that would be another part of the process you can look at too.
And as a producer, I want to add, we do have to pay some money into like subscriptions that we have, so we have to do that. So we do use the money. We're not out partying with it, though we could if we got a lot of money. If you guys want to give us a lot of money, we'll go party with it.
Yeah,
but anyway,
we'll go party wherever you guys are at. Why not?
but anyways, there's one other thing I want to mention before we go. If you have not watched the video that we did, the interview that I put out yesterday on feminism, I think is a really important thing for everyone to listen to at some point, both parts, part 1 and part 2. It was an excellent interview. Thank you.
Yeah. To add to that, that was actually my favorite interview I've done so far because I learned so much in that process just doing it. And so if I was not as well informed as I thought I was with that, then I'm sure that you guys probably would get a lot of value to this. I think it's applicable if you are anti-feminist, feminist, or whatever you are in between, if you're male, female, or whatever you are in between. I think that you will get a lot of value from watching this. And it actually explains so much too, to say, because I think Janet mentions at some point, hey, I always considered myself to be a feminist, but I didn't really want to call it because of all of these things that I was seeing feminists being portrayed as. And she actually explains that really well as to why people have that hesitancy because of what feminism in the, I guess, the public consciousness has become, more or less. A really good interview. Please watch it. And lastly, if you cannot donate to our Patreon page, but you want to help, please consider promoting our videos by sharing it with family and friends. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. Good night, everybody.
Good night.